Yeah, it's interesting, this Obama quote. I mean, he did say, "Do not give Ukraine the illusion that they could beat Russia." He also said, he warned that we shouldn't provoke a conflict with the Russians because they will have escalation control. It's they have the proximity, and as we know in this kind of war, especially high intensity war, logistics is everything. So. It would not be a good way. Russia would always be able to match what the NATO and the United States could come with. So, of
You're
course,
right. Now,
but
Glenn,
this
let me
should have
just
been common sense.
yeah, let me interrupt for a second because just thinking before it leaves my mind, things do go in and out of my mind these days. He talked about core interests,
Yeah.
and it is. He talked with Goldberg from the Atlantic a couple of months before he went out into the western sunset. He said, "Look, we have to be really careful not to overextend our strategy here. Um, we have core interests. The Russians have core interests. Now, with respect to Ukraine, we don't have any core interests." Well, hello. Yes, that's true, Mr. President, but the Russians do. Okay. Well, okay. Now that was 10 years ago. Okay. Now we're coming back to the situation where finally Trump, of all people, Trump is saying, oh my God, yes, Russians have core interests. They have preponderance of strength. I've looked at the map now. They've showed me more maps, and doesn't look like the Ukrainians have a prayer to prevail. And so let's tuck our core interests into, well, how are we going to do this? We can't really say that China's not a threat anymore, or Russia's not. Oh, well, let's say the Western Hemisphere where we can do what we want still, okay? Is the Western Hemisphere a strategic threat? Give me a break. And yet we'll put them number A or letter A under the priorities. Now, Glenn, part of that, I think, is Trump finally looking at the tectonic shifts in power from west to east, concretized by that gathering in Beijing with the parade and all, where all those world leaders were except Trump and some of the Europeans, and the visual demonstration that, look, BRICS and everything else, they got it going really well for us, and we're not going to be able to prevail in the old ways. Well, let me check out the Navy. No, Eldridge Colby, you say we got to go to war with China, or even John Mearsheimer says it's almost inevitable we'll have a war with China. The only thing I disagree with John Mearsheimer on, okay? So everybody, now, how are we going to do that? Well, we're going to build these ships. How expensive are these ships, and when will they build? Oh, it will take about 10 years. And Russia, the Chinese will stop building. No, they won't. So all the war games showed that in any conflict with China, we would lose probably in the first couple of days. Why? Lines of supply, logistics, and the same thing applied to Ukraine. I think of General Milley or Secretary Austin. They studied the same thing I did as an Army officer, okay? A platoon leader, a company commander as I was, okay? So what do? Well, before you go into any kind of conflict, you do a estimate of the situation. It sounds crazy, yeah? Well, it's not crazy, okay? You find out where the enemy is, how many they are, what weapons they have, what weather is going to be, what the terrain is like, and finally, perhaps most important, locks. Now, not the locks that you have with bagels in New York. These are LOCS, lines of communication and supply. If you ain't got them taken care of, you ain't got nothing. And you might want to punish Russia or weaken Russia or give Russia a strategic defeat, but in the end, you're going to look feckless because Russia has all the cards. The good news is, in my view, Trump realizes that now. Trump has to deal with opposition not only among the coalition of the, whatever you call them, three blind mice, plus Zelensky, but he has to deal with the people back at home, like General Kellogg, like maybe the Secretary of War, Hegseth, like maybe Rubio himself. And the good news is that Rubio is kept out of these things, okay? And the good news is also that Putin will talk to Witkoff for 5 hours. The 6th time he's talked to Witkoff, okay? Now, when he was asked about this by a Russian interviewer, what was that like? And Putin's, oh, that was too long. That's too long. And they say, with Witkoff and Kushner? Yeah, but it was worthwhile because you've heard of those 28 points. So we addressed each and every one of them individually. That's why it took 5 hours. So we have a lot of hope that we could come to a mutual understanding. It was a very profitable, it was a good meeting, and we hope to continue it. Sotto voce, without Rubio. The last thing I'll say on that is, I know a lot of people think it's not proper, particularly the British. It's not proper to have people negotiating with the Russians that aren't part of your government. What is Witkoff's position? None. What about Jared Kushner? Well, he's the son-in-law, but no. So you can't do it that way. That's not the way to do it. Oh, my God. If the alternative is Rubio, that is precisely the way to do it. And so what will happen? I think that the signs are, well, as usual, I see them more favorable toward an eventual solution and maybe an early agreement on principle on Ukraine against the backdrop of, as I said before, U.S. and Russian wishes to have a good relationship one with the other, and the fact that Russia won the war. And if you had any doubt about how Trump feels about who's winning the war, I'm thinking back, analysts, we used to have to read everything and watch everything, but we never had to kind of watch the president on an airplane giving a press conference to reporters. Very rarely did that happen. You could hardly hear him over the noise. But when he was going down to Florida for Thanksgiving, one of the correspondents said, "Now, Mr. President, what about this land? The Ukrainians aren't going to give up any land." And what Trump says is, do I have it? Well, I have it pretty much committed to memory. He says, "Look, the Russians are calling the shots here. You have to realize that this land that has yet to be taken, it's going to be taken by the Russian forces eventually anyhow. And so why do you want 50,000, 60,000 more Ukrainians dead in this fool's errand to defend what is now indefensible?" So what we're negotiating. So that we're talking about that. Now, Trump says sometimes what he really thinks, and what he really thinks happens to dovetail with reality, a reality that the West Europeans don't seem to understand all that much, or the East Europeans either. But I think it's come to the point where Trump has realized that he'd been ill-advised in the past to think that Ukraine could possibly win. I mean, Kellogg forced him to say that just 2 months ago, for God's sake. So he's dealing with reality. And so I see the glass more than half full here. It's still going to take time, but I'm hopeful that some kind of false flag operation launched by MI6 or some other entity of that kind will not put the kibosh on the progress that I see being made step by step, with Putin willing to engage for 5 hours if necessary with Witkoff and Kushner, not so much with Rubio.